where the best response seems to be a kind of giddy, silly ecstasy at the very inability to have a self. I mean, and I can't say that I don't share some of the fun of it for our younger generation of quasi-cyborgs that will be raised in this postmodern culture. They will be unrecognizable, perhaps, within a few generations. Everybody's saying, oh, well, that's impossible. Let me try to generate this kind of historical change that Nietzsche was one of the first to foresee and to discuss, and which I will discuss throughout this course under the heading of nihilism, and that will be the social and experiential side of the problems of interpretation, although they're also experiential to me. And that's the problem of nihilism is the problem of finding meaning in a world that is no longer God-centered. That did not mean for Nietzsche, any more than it did for Marx or Weber or the other people who gave accounts of modern life, that there would no longer be a lot of religious people. You follow me? And it didn't mean that there still wouldn't be churches and believers, and there still wouldn't be holy wars and so on. It meant that an overarching cosmological story into which you could fit, that provided a background of meaning and a place for you, would be radically missing, and in its place there would be market relations, in which what you were would amount to what you do for a living. So a lot of you know about me, I do have a couple of my ex-students in here, but a lot of you know about me is that I do university stuff for a living. See, and that isn't a remark about my predilection, which is something I've talked about before. This is over my predilections. It's a mark about my profession, but it's more than that. Under these social conditions, it is an absolutely ontological remark about what I am. You know, when people at a dinner party say, "What do you do?" that is not a trivial remark. It's a story about a culture. What do you do? Answers what you are. Now, I know people resist this, and I enjoy the resistance. You know, at dinner parties, you go, well, I'm a writer. It's sort of almost a joke if you're at a dinner party in New York. I'm an artist. I'm a performance artist. I'm a writer. I'm a this. And you find, well, but I mean, you know, what do you do? They go, oh, I drive a cab. I wait tables. But my third novel is, I'm working on it. Yeah. No, this is a culture full of market relations where the construction of meaning becomes the burden of a newly constructed category, the individual, the bourgeois individual, the individual of modern life, the individual competitor on a market, in a market. No longer the member of, like, the community of God, in the broad sense, you know, of the feudal period, but someone who must construct the meaning of their lives in singularity. Let me say that instead of alone. With their, you know, sort of in singular, with their own resources. And that is a task that Max Weber thought would overburden them. And it's a task that Nietzsche thought almost impossible, but one he undertook, as I said earlier, by trying to become Plato to his own Socrates. In other words, not to actually live an interesting life like Socrates, but to write one as though he had lived it, a kind of deferred relation, but still to make meaning out of his own life in a context, and this, again, this word nihilism, I'll say a little bit more about it, in a context where the threat was nihilism, a culture where there was no fabric from which to construct meaning. Now, nihilism, in a certain way, then, won't be used by me to describe a philosophical position, because to the extent it does, it's supposed to be some silly position like this. Nihilists are people who believe in nothing. Well, if that's what nihilists were, there wouldn't be any, and that's not what we're diagnosing. We're diagnosing a nihilistic culture where no enduring beliefs can provide meaning for the overwhelming majority of members of that culture. That's the problem that Nietzsche identifies coming along with modern life, and also not coming along as a mystification, but coming along as part of the inside of modern life. Comes along with Darwin, In other words, being demystified about our origins. It comes along with a new view of the cosmos, being demystified about the importance of the earth. You know, where it is and how big it is and in the center of what. Being demystified concerning a whole series of things about which earlier there were powerful, important, meaning-giving myths. Part of the work of the Enlightenment was this destructive work of destroying myths. That was the work carried out by the bourgeois class and by its ideologues. I mean, it's not bad. I mean, you remember they said we won't have a decent world to live in until the last priest is hung on the guts of the last king and stuff. I mean, well, those are the mottos of the great revolutions. This is Washington, D.C., right? These are the great bourgeois revolutions. We love them, and they may be, in fact, a world historic destiny. Nietzsche's worry was that this kind of demystification, without creating new festivals, new games, new myths, would lead to a situation in which human beings willed only not to will any longer, who wanted sort of only not to want any longer. And Nietzsche saw this emerging culture as one that would be inimical to human life, about which, as I said, he doesn't have a lot of consoling things to say. So I'm going to read a little passage of Nietzsche and try to stop there to give us a frame within which Nietzsche views human beings. Now, I don't think this is all that theoretic, and I don't want it to be. I want it to be something that you can grab a hold of and understand, because this is kind of a modern myth I'm about to spell out for you. In fact, I may not read it. I may just gloss it. It's a modern myth that I'd like to spell out for you that many of us believe. And let's see, after we've examined this myth, if this is more or less comforting than the beautiful myth of redemption in, say, for example, the Bible. The myth is something like this. There are billions and billions of stars. The earth is a tiny one. We crawl across it for just a few seconds, and then we individually are gone. Billions and billions of eons of time before and billions afterwards pass. And the earth eventually goes out like a cinder, and perhaps the whole universe collapses into itself. And after all that's happened, absolutely nothing will have been done. Now, that's a very important myth. Many of us believe that one too. But against that background, it becomes difficult as we chip away at our daily little lives, selling shoes, selling tires, teaching class, to try to find any damn thing that means anything. So our search through Nietzsche will not be a search for dogmatic answers to that question, but to follow his quest and ours for a form of self-creation under circumstances and with a background of myths that do not make it seem likely that we will have a happy result. So the end of my first lecture is that our interpretive efforts here, too, are bound to fail.